are going to learn about the International Standard on Food Safety, that is the ISO 22000. This is the first time the ISO has published the International Standard on Food Safety in the year 2005, and this standard is currently also under the revisions and is likely to be revised in the coming years. Now, to give a quick understanding about the food safety management system, how it has been developed in the coming years, is that in the year 1959, the NASA and Pillsbury jointly organized the system of failure mode effect analysis, the HACCP program. This particular HACCP system came into picture only through them by applying the FMEA technique into the food safety system. Later on, the same was being adopted by the NACMCF and then the Codex. Then there was a time for the international standards which came into picture. That was the first BRC, that is a British Retail Consortium Global Standard on Food. This was initially published in the year 1998, which was a private standard for the consortium of the retailers of the Britain, and if they want to sell the material, the suppliers want to sell the material in the UK market, they need to comply to the BRC standard. In the year 2001, the ISO, the 9000 was substantiated by another series of ISO 15161. It was a guidance document for the food and drink industries for implementation of the ISO 9001. In the year 2000, the national body of experts of the Netherlands, they joined together to develop the Dutch HACCP standard. In the year 2005, we have finally the ISO 22000 standard, the international standard available for the third party certifications and food safety systems, which so that the national standards and private standards can be avoided. Now, to understand the International Standard on Food Safety ISO 22000, it is once again important to review the HACCP principles, which comprises of 5 preliminary steps and 7 principal steps. These are the total 12 steps of HACCP implementation. The 5 preliminary steps includes assembling the HACCP team, product description, intended use, construction of the flow diagram, and on-site confirmation of this flow diagram. The 7 principal steps, which are called the main steps of the HACCP implementation, includes conducting a hazard analysis. When we say conducting a hazard analysis, it itself means 3 steps within it, that is identifying the hazards in the terms of physical, chemical and biological contamination. The second part is doing the risk analysis in the combination of probability and severity. And the third part is developing the appropriate control measures so that you understand that what kind of a controls exist in your system. The next principal step is determination of critical control point, that means CCP determination. There is a decision tree model which is being proposed by the Codex Alimentarius Commission to identify the most critical step based on the hazards which have high level of the risk. The third step is the establishment of the critical limits for each CCPs. For each CCPs which are being identified, a critical limit has to be established. For each critical limits and CCPs, you need to develop the monitoring procedures, which should have the well-defined methodology and the accountability that who is going to do the monitoring and who is going to verify the monitoring. The next step is the establishing the corrective actions. Now, there is a chances of deviations in the system, therefore, it has to be the methodology for corrective actions for the product and the process needs to be well defined before any process is being implemented. The next step is you need to have a well-defined verification procedures and establish a record keeping and documentations of all those which has been carried out in this particular system. So, this is about the HACCP principles as defined in the Codex Alimentarius Commission, which is the basis of any international standard, national standards and regulations. Now, let us understand that how ISO 22000 has come. The ISO 22000 is a part of the development of the HACCP. It's not just a HACCP standard. It is aligned to the HACCP standard, and it actually retains the basic things of the preliminary steps and principal steps. It further strengthens the prerequisite programs because many things which were described as a voluntary basis that you should implement the prerequisite programs prior to going to HACCP, here they all become shalls. Shalls means they have become now the mandatory requirements. It divides the prerequisite programs logically into different orders and which needs to be implemented. It is compliant with the requirement of ISO 17021. 17021 is a requirement which defines the requirements for the certification bodies while implementing which are verifying the 22000. This is written in an auditable format. One of the big disadvantage of the HACCP, Codex HACCP, was that it is a guidance document and there is no auditability requirements. That means how a person should go and do the assessments, that is not defined. However, in 22000 it's a well defined standard. It further defines the management responsibility. That means it's a management system standard. So that means there is a requirement for management policy. There are certain level of management commitment which is well defined, which was steps which we used to define as a step 0 in the HACCP system, because any system needs to have a management cooperation. Management needs to review the system and we need to ensure internal and external communication. ISO 22000 standard has a very big advantage that it clearly defines what kind of a documentation needs to be maintained and what are the mandatory documents and what are the additional requirements, which was lacking in the HACCP system. The another very important aspect of ISO 22000 is that it clearly separates the validation from verification. Like, once you make your HACCP plan, you need to validate that HACCP plan. That means initially at the start and later on the ongoing basis. Whenever there is any change in the system, whenever there is change in the technology, major change in the equipment, you need to validate those equipments, you need to validate your process so that it gives you the intended desired results. Just have a look on the hierarchy of the food safety system, which comprises of 4 pillars. There are 4 prime things. The lowest or at the base stands the prerequisite program. That means you need to have an effective support foundation programs. And on the top stands the interactive communication. That means for anything and everything you do, you need to interact among the food business, among the employees in the food businesses, or also across the food businesses. That means among the stakeholders like suppliers, like your customers, like your regulatory bodies. So there has to be a chain of interactive communication. Over the prerequisite programs, there are the HACCP requirements. When you develop your HACCP plan or your prerequisites, you must take care of your regulatory requirements. That is, when you do the hazard identifications, you develop your prerequisite programs. Many of our regulatory requirements, especially about a Food Safety and Standards Act, which is there, which clearly defines the HACCP as one of the mandatory requirements. And then in the food safety management system, there is a system elements. When we say system elements, it means there is a system for the suppliers, there is a system for the customers, there is a system within the organization defined by the management, and also there are additional requirements of internal audits, management reviews, etc. Now let's understand, let's go through some of the terminologies of the 22000 to better understand this standard. The first one says food safety. What is food safety? Food safety is a concept that food will not cause harm to the consumer when it is separated and or eaten according to its intended use. Food safety is related to the occurrence of the food safety hazard and does not include other human health aspects like malnutrition. So that means whenever you consume the food, you need to be assured that food will not cause you any harm, and that concept is what is food safety. Food chain, it's the sequence of the stages and operations involved in the production, processing, distribution and storage, handling of the food ingredients from primary productions to the consumers. This food chain aspect is very well defined in our coming slides, because this is one of the very important concept which is being introduced in the ISO 22000. The prerequisite programs, these are the basic conditions and activities that are necessary to maintain a hygienic environment throughout the food chain, suitable for the production, handling and provision of the safe end products and safe food for human consumptions. These good practices can be GHP, GMP, GDP, GTP, etc. The operational prerequisite programs, the OPRP identified by the hazard analysis, they are something which are coming through the hazard assessment, and they are over and above the PRP, which are essential to control the likelihood of introducing a food safety hazard and or the contamination or proliferation of the food safety hazards in the products or in the processing environment. So now this new concept has come into picture. That means anything which is a basic requirement, that means cleaning of the tables, cleaning of the floors, etc. These are the PRPs. However, when you find that this table needs an additional cleaning apart from the detergent, or an additional CIP is required where you need to use a sanitizer, it becomes your operational PRP, because anything additional for your operations, which is because to control the hazard analysis, becomes your OPRP. Then comes the validation, verification and monitoring. These are three important terminologies which we need to understand. Validation means obtaining the evidence that the control measures managed by the HACCP plan and the operational PRP are going to be effective. That means they have the capability to give the desired effectiveness, desired control of a particular hazard. This particular validation study is being done prior to starting the operation. That means once you start your operation, you need to ensure that the products meet the desired requirements. So validation is basically for your plans. That means when whatever you plan is correct. The verification is nothing but a cross check and confirming to the provision of the objective evidence that the specified requirements are being fully met. That means the requirements are giving the desired result. This is an assessment carried out during an end, means once you do the activities, then only this verification comes into picture. The third thing is monitoring. That means you are in a planned sequential ways, you are taking the observations so that you can demonstrate that yes, my system is in control. This monitoring can be online monitoring and it can be offline monitoring. It can be on a daily basis, it can be on the hourly basis, or recording of the data loggers which continuously work. Now let's give a little idea on the how this ISO 22000 standard is and what are the series of standards under this ISO 22000. The ISO 22000 Food Safety Management System standard comprises of two types of standards which are very important to understand. One is the food safety, the standards which are for the food businesses. That means the person who wants to implement the HACCP system, that is the food safety management. The other side of the standard is the food safety auditing. That means the one who wants to audit the food safety, what standards are applicable to them. When we talk about the implementation standard, it is the prime standard is ISO 22000, which specifies the requirement for the food safety management system across the chain. The another standard is ISO 22002 that was released in the year 2009, which is nothing but PAS 220. That means publicly accessible specification, which is a BSI standard, and it specifies the requirements for the prerequisite program. It's a simple standard which is a guidance document. It is not an auditable until unless it gets combined with the 22000 standard. The 22004 standard, it provides the guidance on how to apply ISO 22000 in your business. Then we have the ISO 22005 standard. ISO 22005 standard is a traceability standard. It provides a standard on the traceability of the feed and food chain. Then the auditing standard is ISO 22003 standard, which provides the requirements for the bodies providing the auditing and certification. Then there is ISO 19011, which is the 2011 version, which provides you the guidelines how to do the audit, how you should behave, how you should plan the audit. So these are the some of the standards which are relevant when you are implementing or doing the audits, whether internal audit or a third party audit. Now, if you want to have an overview of the food safety management system, it includes the food safety management system, general requirements, management requirements, resource requirements. Then you are planning and realizing a safe product. That means you are actually making the product, and then you are doing the validation studies, verifications, and improving your food safety management system. Prerequisite programs, we have already gone through the prerequisite programs definition. It's in a simple term, it's a basic step or procedure that control the operational conditions, verify the conformance and effectiveness of the program is monitored, and it is the foundation of the HACCP plan. There are 7 prerequisite programs: the premises, that is building layout, transportation, storage, equipment, machinery, personal, sanitation and pest control, process controls and recalls. Now let's see the food chain. In a food chain, there are 4 major partners. The first is the direct food chain, that is the direct suppliers from the crop producer to the retailers, a feed producer, primary producer, manufacturers, etc. And then we have the indirect suppliers to the food chain, which includes producers of pesticides, fertilizers, the support services, the transportation services, the cleaning material producers, the equipment manufacturers, other service providers like pest control service providers. So they are also part of the food chain. And then we have the regulatory bodies who control the food businesses, and then we have the consumers for whom this all activity is being done. The ISO 22000 model. Now, if it's a management system standard, it needs to follow the PDCA approach. Now, what is PDCA approach? It is the plan, do, check approach. That means for any activity, we need to do a planning, we need to do that activity, we need to verify that activity, and we need to do the improvements in that activity. Now, let's see this particular model in line with the PDCA approach. If we go for planning and realization of safe food, it very clearly you can make out that it is planning the safe food. Now, let's go to the preliminary steps to hazard analysis. In general, you will find that people understand that now we are doing something, but actually we are not doing anything. We are still planning. We are planning a preventive measure. We are planning a preventive actions so that our system is going to work effectively. So, preliminary steps to enable hazard analysis, conducting the hazard analysis, validation of the control measures. That means once you have developed your hazard analysis, you verify that whatever controls are validated, you establish the HACCP plan and establish the OPRP. All these steps are part of your planning. So the better you plan, the more effective you plan, the better you will able to deliver. So that is what is the intent of this ISO 22000 model, that you do lot of planning, do the accurate preventive action, do the accurate risk assessment, and on the basis of this planning, you implement the system, and then there will be very less chances of failure. However, we will still not say that there will be no failure, because the system is designed to minimize the risk but not a zero risk. And then you go to the monitoring of and corrective actions, verifications of your system as a part of the check, and then improve your system. Continual improvement is part of it. Now let's understand the framework of the ISO 22000 standard when there are different clauses. When we talk about the ISO 22000 standard, it starts with the clause 1. Clause 1 talks about the scope. When we say scope, who all can apply and go for the ISO 22000 certification? The ISO 22000 can be implemented by anybody in the food chain. That means the ones who are in the direct supply chain and the ones who are in the indirect supply chains, like the equipment manufacturer, the service providers, even they can go for the ISO 22000. So the scope is widened. Otherwise, it was only thought to be implemented by the direct supply chains, the manufacturers, the processors, or the suppliers. So this particular notion has been changed in the 22000. The second clause talks about the normative reference. When we say the normative reference, it refers to what all documents the 22000 refers. The third clause refers to the definitions of the ISO 22000, which we have just covered few definitions, for example, food safety, PRP, operational PRP, etc. And then the main standard begins with the clause number 4, which is the food safety management system. Now, the food safety management system consists of two sub-clauses, primarily two sub-clauses. One is the general requirement, which talks about the general pillars of the food safety management system, HACCP, that we need to implement all the 4 pillars which we talked in the initial slides. That includes your HACCP system, your PRP systems, your system elements and your communication network. And then you also need to talk about the outsource activity control in your clause number 4.1. In the clause number 4.2, we talk about the documentations. Documentation includes your procedures, your records, how you have to make them legible, your external documents, all these needs to be in a particular, needs to be appropriately maintained. Now, in the center of this PDCA, what you can see that the management elements are being put in the standard, because the management is at the center of any food safety implementation. So, what is the responsibilities which are being assigned to the management? It says that management should be committed towards the food safety. This commitment they can demonstrate by providing resources, by providing time, by providing team, etc. They should make a food safety policy with a vision aligned with your business objectives. They should make a food safety management system planning. Responsibility and authorities should be defined. Food safety team leader should be described, means this person is going to be the food safety team leader. There needs to be a communication channel, means how you are going to communicate to the external stakeholders and how you are going to communicate with the internal stakeholders. All these things needs to be described. Then you have the emergency preparedness and response, and then management needs to, once they have developed all this system in place, they need to review the system from time to time to see its appropriateness. So, they have described everything, the responsibility, the team leader, the authority, the people, and in case of any failures, what kind of actions has to be done. Now, on the left hand side, you can see the resource management. This is another important part of the planning. If you go to our PDCA, this is a part of our planning. How the resources are to be given. Provisions provide the resources, which includes your work environment, your infrastructure, and your human resources. That means your personals. So, these personals should be competent, they should be provided trainings, they should have the necessary expertise to perform their activity. Then we move on to the clause 7. Now, this is the main clause which covers the requirement of the HACCP system into it and realize the product. That means the safe product is being created by this particular clause. So, it begins with prerequisite programs. So, one of the foundation of the HACCP system. It describes all the prerequisite programs in detail. The next part is the preliminary steps to hazard analysis, which describes your 5 preliminary steps from team, product description, intended use, flow diagram and its verification. Then the next important clause is the hazard analysis. That means again you identify the hazards in the terms of physical, chemical and biological hazards. You describe the risk and then you develop the control measures. Now, one thing very important here is in the clause 7.4, the ISO 22000 standard has described the clause 7.4.4, that is the decision tree, or you can say the selection and assessment of the control measures as CCP in a very different way, and it has said that you describe the method. It can be in the form of a decision tree, it can be in the form of the numerical value scoring method, whatever method you describe, but you cover the 7 elements of this. However, in the Codex decision tree there were only 4 elements. So, there are 3 more elements, that is the synergistic effects which has been added into it, and then there is a position in the food chain that is being added to it, and then they have added the failure consequences to it. So, these are few things which are being added in a different fashion in 22000. Clause 7.5 says that these 2 elements, once you decide the control measures, you divide them into rather Now, two elements, the operational PRPs and the HACCP plans. HACCP plan is nothing but your CCP. Then you keep on updating your information. Clause 7.7 says that HACCP is not a standalone system. You need to update your informations, preliminary informations, your PRPs and HACCP plan. Clause 7.8 talks about verification planning. That means you don't have to do the verification, but you have to plan for your verification in a systematic manner so that all the things are being covered. Clause 7.9 talks about traceability system, which is not there in your Codex HACCP, well defined. However, here it is very well defined. Then it also talks about 7.10 where control of non-conforming product is to be done. Now, this control of non-conformity product has a very important element in this 22,000 standard, that is called the withdrawal. When we say withdrawal, that means you need to have an effective traceability. Who is going to do the withdrawal? What will be the methodology for withdrawal? How you will ensure traceability? All these things are well defined in your clause 7.10. The last clause is the clause which deals with the validation, verification and improvement of the food safety management system. Validation is nothing but ensuring that whatever you have done in the planning and the planned CCPs, planned critical limits will be able to give you a desired level of control in your HACCP system. After validation, you need to do the monitoring and measuring. The control of monitoring and measuring means you need to calibrate your instruments, you do the verifications, and based on the results of your verification, system updating, you improve your system and update your system. So, in nutshell, we can say that ISO 22000 is a very holistic standard which covers all the requirements of your PRP, HACCP, plus additional requirements of the systems, plus additional requirement of the communication. And it is very well aligned with the other standards like BRC. Food packaging is compliant with Guide 72 and parallel with 9001. It is intended to be used by the organizations and anybody in the organization, and it is combined with PAS 220 to make it a food safety system certification. So, this is all from our side. Thank you very much.